Founder. It is a 9 on the Giorsi factor today. It is a beautiful day. After you won't get done watching GoLocal Live, make sure you get out this afternoon and enjoy the great day. We're going right down to the University of Virginia. We've got the chair of the Political Science Department, Jennifer Lawless. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, how are you?
Good. It has been a rock and roll last week of major events in American politics. Let's start with last night's town hall meeting hosted by CNN, Caitlin Collins, with Donald Trump in front of a, quote, Republican audience at, I believe it was at St. Anselm. Let's talk about it. What was your overall takeaway, and then we'll go into some of the details.
So my two broad thoughts were, first, Donald Trump did everything he possibly could to encourage his base to stick with him, but probably brought on not even one additional voter. And second, any fears that people had about Donald Trump maybe abandoning his ways from 2016 through 2020 or softening on some issues so that he might be able to win the primary and then the general election, do not have to worry at all. He doubled down on everything last night in a way that was quite surprising.
Did he ensure he wins the Republican primary?
Look, if the Republican primaries were held nationwide tomorrow, I don't think that there's any doubt that he would win. I do think that as people like Ron DeSantis start launching actual campaigns against him, some of the words that he used, some of the examples that he gave, the footage from his deposition in the E. Jean Carroll case could ultimately come back to haunt him. We see Chris Christie already saying that Donald Trump does not have the character that we need in a president. He might be right on the issues, but that's not enough. And I think that that's where the Republicans will attack him. Now, if it's a crowded field, they're going to wind up, cannibalizing part of his vote, but not enough to win.
Ron DeSantis, and I don't want to get off track, I want to stay on this issue, but Ron DeSantis has run just a god-awful non-campaign campaign, fighting with Disney, which you can characterize as a fight against corporate America. I'm not sure how well that does as a pro-business Republican from Florida. I just don't understand that dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, it also looks petty and punitive, and people love Disney. So of all the corporations that you're going to try and take on, I don't know that, the place where you vacation with your children is the target that is going to resonate with most Americans. But he has also been focusing a lot on COVID when the American public seems to be clamoring to move on from COVID. So at this point, it doesn't look like he has his finger on the pulse of where Republican voters are. But it is still early, and he hasn't officially launched. It's possible that we have generally low expectations for him based on the last couple of months, but that could all turn around.
A guy named Chris Leach is now running CNN. He's been running it for about a year. He's been making a lot of changes. Last night's event was somewhat an effort for him to move CNN to the middle of the road of these cable networks. First and foremost, their viewership has just been plummeting over the past year. Second of all, is anybody looking for the middle? I mean, the national news at 6:30 still has an audience. That seems to be the middle of the road. Are you really looking for opinion that's middle of the road?
No, and there's a huge literature out there, and political scientists have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, and tons of years to demonstrate that people who are watching cable news in general are strong partisans who engage in selective exposure, which means that they look for the news that reinforces their already held beliefs. Part of the reason that CNN's ratings are plummeting is probably because of this kind of tactic. There is no middle on cable news. The other thing that I would say is that was a really, really poor attempt at providing the middle for two reasons. The first is that audience was not a middle of the road audience. That was not a New Hampshire primary electorate, even in a Republican primary. Those people could have been handpicked out of the most conservative area of Oklahoma. They were all Trump supporters. They were sycophants, and they were cheering on things that the Trump base likes that generally appall the rest of America. I could not believe when I was sitting there, and a day after he's found guilty of libel in the civil of sexual abuse and defamation in the civil case against E. Jean Carroll, he mocks her, he makes fun of juries, he questions the rule of law, and this audience erupts with laughter and applause. The second reason that this was not, I think, an effective attempt to move to the middle is because The analysis on CNN after the debate also tried to provide this kind of balance. And the conservative side now genuinely believes that fact checking is not a thing. And instead, it was just Caitlin Collins injecting her views of what reality are. And that creates false equivalencies. And it also makes it difficult for anybody who genuinely is undecided or who is in the middle to even know where to go.
Yeah, let's jump in on that. I think Caitlin Collins has gotten overall pretty positive reviews. 31-year-old news anchor for CNN, worked in the White House press corps for the past few years before getting an anchoring position. But while she did a good job interjecting herself with facts, he kind of ran her over. Is there a missed opportunity by journalists today of stopping the discussion, literally pulling down a screen, pulling up a screen, whatever it takes? The case in point was a discussion about whether or not Trump's Secretary of Defense had called for the National Guard. Trump lied. There's absolutely no two ways about it. There is testimony given by his former Secretary of Defense. Should that screen have come down, should the testimony of his former secretary gone up to refute and just sort of level the playing field? Because otherwise it is an uncomfortable position for the journalist to constantly interject, and it looks partisan. It looks like you're fighting with him for partisan reasons rather than correcting the record.
Look, I think that that's a great idea, but there are a couple of potential downsides. The first is that the amount, especially for somebody like Donald Trump, the amount of prep time that would go into that. I mean, you have to assume that he's going to lie or mislead on literally every topic and every statement. So, to be prepared means to go back and cull every potential question and work under the assumption that he's not going to give a straight answer. The second thing is, I think it opens the door for allegations that it's a gotcha event. And it's one thing for her to inject her corrections and provide the facts. It's another where every time he speaks, for a camera to come down. And I think it'll make it unlikely for other candidates to approach CNN if they feel like they could always be placed in these gotcha moments. Now, in terms of democracy and
I just want to jump in for 1 second.
I think it's a great idea.
For just 1 second, though, Tim Russert did it, and he did it very effectively and Republicans and Democrats respected him. There was no shortage of people who wanted to be a guest on Meet the Press on Sunday mornings on NBC. Tim Russert did it. You said something. It wasn't consistent with what you said 6 months earlier, 12 months earlier, 5 years earlier. That screen popped up, and Tim Russert would say, because he did the work, he actually had them, so he would let the person's former words compete with what the person was claiming today.
And that was 15 years ago. And I know that doesn't seem like a lot of time in real life, but in the political environment that we are now all enmeshed in, it's a lifetime. And the kinds of candidates that have emerged, the fact that you've got candidates and Donald Trump is at the front of the pack there saying things like, well, these are alternative facts and that's fake news, really makes it more difficult to engage in that approach. I think it's worth a shot. I don't think that there's any downside to holding candidates on both sides of the aisle accountable for everything that they've said. But I do think that in a post-Trump era, the kind of tactics that Russert used are, they might be a thing of the past.
Yeah, I don't know. At the end of an NBA basketball game, the referee used to decide whether the ball was out of bounds on the Celtics or the 76ers. Now there's 400 camera angles, and they make sure they get it right. Maybe it's time to cover less. She kept saying we need to cover more questions. Maybe cover less questions, but make sure that the record is clear to the viewer when they came out of it, that what Donald Trump said, if it was not true, could be proven to be not true. And the same for Joe Biden. Listen, the Biden White House isn't perfect on facts all the time either.
But what I will note is we can look to the January 6th hearings where there was a ton of video testimony and there were many, many clips of Donald Trump saying specific things. And Republicans' attitudes toward whether their views of Donald Trump changed, whether they believed what he said, whether they believed the committee, did not move over the course of those hearings among people who watched them. So we might also be in an era now where it doesn't matter what your side says, it doesn't matter what your candidate says, you're going to stick with that person regardless. And, again, I think that that's a dangerous place for a democratic government to be.
Well, listen, we face it all the time. Last night we got an email, this is, multiple times per day, but as an example, somebody complaining that we covered George Santos's arrest and that we were being partisan and woke. I then sent them, 5 articles about Democratic politicians in Rhode Island being arrested. Listen, there's no shortage of arrests. We cover more Democrats getting arrested in Rhode Island because there's more Democrats in office. So it's a numbers game. Not one is more perfect than the other. Let's jump over from CNN to George Santos. Where are we with George Santos? Is this finally the beginning of the end?
I don't know. I can't believe that we're still even discussing George Santos and that for the last several months we basically haven't been. This is crazy. I mean, he's been charged with 13 federal offenses. He was released on $500,000 on bond. And despite this, Kevin McCarthy was unwilling initially to say that if the ethics committee finds him guilty, he will call for his resignation. He's now only beginning to say that he won't support him in a re-election bid. I mean, this is where we are in society right now. This is where we are in politics in Washington, D.C. At some point, no one representative's vote should be so important that we're willing to provide every possible allowance to that person. George Santos it's clear that George Santos has been charged with breaking numerous federal laws to better himself at the expense, oftentimes, of his constituents, and he lied about it. And the fact that the Speaker of the House is unwilling right now to say, and was unwilling 2 weeks ago and 4 weeks ago and 8 weeks ago to say that this behavior is problematic, is a problem in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, we do have to give one, we've seen these federal prosecutors don't always get it right. I don't think there's any doubt in this case. I do think he'll plead guilty. I don't think he will risk the amount of potential jail time he could receive with the sentencing guidelines if he took this to trial. But right now, he is innocent until proven guilty.
Right, so he's pled not guilty, facing at least 20 years in prison. He might very well strike a plea deal. However, this is also a situation where McCarthy could have made his decision based on a hypothetical. He didn't have to call for his resignation, but he could say, look, if he's charged or if there's evidence or if he's found guilty, then I will do this. He was unwilling even to do that. And I think that that just speaks to a general sense of winning is everything. And, it doesn't matter who's on the team. And I think that as long as we have a political system where there are no political penalties for people who break the law, we have a problem. And that's the other point that I'll make about this week. What we saw this week with both Santos and Trump is that people are beginning to face legal accountability for their actions. But there has been very, very little in the way of political accountability. And there used to be this assumption that the two would go hand in hand. We're in a political system right now, and we're amid polarized times right now, where that's no longer the case. And so as a result, Donald Trump can, have to pay $5 million in damages to E. Jean Carroll. He can, be found liable of sexual abuse. He can, the Proud Boys can be charged with seditious conspiracy and found guilty, and it doesn't matter politically. And so, I just think that it's a place where I'm not sure that most Americans ever thought the United States would be.
Listen, I'm in Rhode Island, you're in Virginia. In Rhode Island, we have no moral high ground. We have had a 2-time convicted felon mayor and almost reelected a 3rd time, came quite close. No disparaging remarks for the mayor of Providence, but he had gotten hit with a significant ethics fine just before he was elected. So we play in the gray zone up here in Rhode Island.
I understand that, but I will say that, being convicted of running City Hall as a criminal enterprise is not the same. It's bad, but it's not the same thing as conspiring to overthrow the United States government.
If he could have, he might have, but he's Yancey. He was limited to space and time and money and
It was circumstance.
He did try and run for governor. That didn't work out so well. And gave the greatest line. He gets beat by Joe Garrahy badly, almost 75-25, and he stands up at the microphones, and pretty much the first words out of his mouth are, "The people of Rhode Island have spoken. They want me to continue to be mayor of Providence." A brilliant pivot at that. So let's go over here to the 1st congressional district here in Rhode Island. It is a bizarre little race. Zai, the mayor of Newport today, announced that he was endorsing Gabe Amo, former staffer to Gina Raimondo, and had a staffing role in the Biden White House. He's running. Aaron Ruggenberg got attacked by some progressives. He seems to have recovered from that and is now lining up a number of sort of national progressive organizations. Sabina Matos, your front runner, was off to a good start. She then announced that she had 31 political endorsements. When you fact checked it, it turned out that 20% of them hadn't actually endorsed her, and she had to correct that record as well. But for the most part, nobody's paying attention. There's 16 of them, I think, is the latest count of those who have formally announced that they are running for the 1st congressional district. The seat becomes vacated at the end of the month. We'll have a primary in September and a general election in November. What should we be looking for in the near future?
Well, I think that it's not going to be a real race until at least some of the candidates start campaigning in a broader way. And so that's not only through local media, but it's also on TV and developing campaign ads. Voters are not paying attention. And the best way for any candidates other than Matos to build name recognition is to reach as broad a group of voters as possible. Now, summer in Rhode Island is not the best time to, close out a campaign, let alone that be basically the entire duration of a campaign. So whoever goes into this at the beginning of June looking strongest, it's that race to lose. I will say 2 things. The first is, I think we will see candidates start to stake out, sort of positions that could generate quite a bit of media attention and coverage. We see that with Ruggenberg calling for Clarence Thomas's impeachment. That's cute, but what is a member of the House of Representatives in the minority party is going to be unlikely to gain much traction on that issue. So it's a little bit unclear, why he's doing that. I don't think that anybody in Rhode Island any Democrat in Rhode Island would necessarily disagree, and I'm not sure that it really differentiates him from the other candidates. It just doesn't really make sense for any of them to get on board.
Is that the fun? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
The other thing that I would say is, if Sabina Matos continues to have a campaign that the most charitable interpretation is that it was sloppy counting, she's going to open herself up to being dishonest. It would have been completely fine to say she had 25 endorsements. There was no reason to say 31. If the campaign can't keep track, that's a problem, because the campaign is going to have many more balls in the air and a lot more juggling to do between now and Election Day. And her staff is going to have a lot more than that to do if she gets elected to Congress. So it's sloppy at best and disingenuous at worst. I would really encourage that campaign to be more careful, because those are the kinds of missteps that these other candidates can jump on.
Yeah, I mean, listen, here's how it works on a campaign. You ask somebody to endorse you. They say yes verbally. You send them, in the olden days, you would literally take them a letter, which they would sign. Then it developed into fax machines. They would sign it and fax it back. Now it's you send them an email and they email you back confirming that they are endorsing you. It is not complicated. It's easy. And just a bumbling, immature, disorganized mistake by the Matos campaign. Is it the deal breaker? No, but a couple more like that probably is a deal breaker on this thing. But
assuming that there's an alternative who can
Right.
capitalize on these errors. And at this point, it's unclear that that's the case, right? So somebody has to become the alternative, and somebody has to demonstrate a level of competence that can call into question what's going on her campaign. And right now, although there are more than a dozen contenders, it's unclear who among them can play that role.
Yeah, and also let's be realistic about Rhode Island in summer. If this is a nice summer, you cannot find folks to talk with in July and August. You see the embarrassing campaigners who go down to Narragansett Town Beach and try and go from blanket to blanket, only to find out that, you know, half of them are from Connecticut or Massachusetts. It is a mess trying to find people in the summer as a candidate, and especially if there's good weather.
Oh, there's no question. I mean, I had a September primary. I know, right? Like, I mean, that week after Labor Day until the primary is your best shot. And if you haven't made your case to voters by then, it's a very, very small window that you've got.
Professor, when you ran, how much did you spend?
About $400,000. But
Okay, so
I mean, it was a long time ago. And
yeah,
you know, so I would say $1 million. I mean, look, in a primary like this, where the candidates probably don't have to be on TV. When I ran, it was 2006. Social media was there. You know, there was Facebook. We had a Facebook page, but it was not like people were buying ads on Facebook. They weren't micro-targeting on various social media sites. So you did need to be not only on cable TV, but on network TV as well, and that costs a lot. Candidates now, especially in such a crowded primary, could probably spend less. Although once you take into account inflation, you know, the dollar amount would be more.
yeah, we've had outreach. We no longer take political ads. We stopped doing that 2 cycles ago in 20, and we got outreach by a couple of campaigns trying to book ads. I'm like, yeah, we just don't take them. And they're like, you're the only ones who won't take our money. But you know, we've taken this position in order to be able to do endorsements and really separate. You know, it's tough to write a news article when there's an adjacent ad for one of the candidates who might be related to that news article. So we think it's a better way to handle it.
Well, one anecdote, let me just share an anecdote. When I ran, the Providence Journal did not endorse in the primary. So how surprised was I on election day when I opened the door and picked up my Providence Journal and there was a sticker saying vote for Jim Langevin on the front. So they didn't endorse, but he was able to buy stickers to place on every single Providence Journal that was distributed that day. So, you know, I think that what you guys are doing is the right move.
You know, it's been a whirlwind week. The president found liable for both sexual abuse and defamation in a civil trial in New York. You saw George Santos arrested, a sitting member of Congress. You saw the CNN event last night. You've got other issues we didn't even talk about. The House Republicans are going after Biden's family and ties to China. You've got a change in policy on the border that could be very embarrassing for the Biden administration, depending on how they handle it and what the optics look like. Where are we right now? I did sort of chuckle, ironically, about in Pakistan, they arrested their former leader, and then days later, their Supreme Court released him. I don't know if that's a premonition or something, but as Pakistan goes, so goes the United States, maybe. Where are we right now?
I think we're on really precarious footing. And it's not only because of, you know, immigration, where it's unclear what's going to happen, you know, later this week in terms of migrants and where they're going to wind up and where they're going to go, but also globally. I mean, if you watch the debate, if you watch the town hall last night, Donald Trump was unwilling to say that the United States would continue to support Ukraine. He was unwilling to say that the United States would shoulder the bulk of the effort in terms of finances. He seemed to equate the war in Ukraine with not providing NATO, you know, with holding NATO more accountable for, you know, paying its dues. This is, you know, he suggested that he could in 24 hours end the war by having a conversation with Vladimir Putin. You know, like this is a very, very scary set of propositions. And I think that all of the candidates running in both the Republican primary and on the Democratic side of the aisle need to focus their efforts on highlighting how dangerous a Donald Trump presidency could be. Liz Cheney has started doing this in New Hampshire with a series of ads. But, you know, this is not a time for strategic voting. I don't think this is not a time where Democrats should be hoping that Trump emerges as the nominee because the stakes are too high. And I would consider looking at every single policy for the next year through that lens.
Jennifer Lawless, the chair of the Political Science Department at the University of Virginia, we thank you every time you come on board and give us the perspective of what's going on politically across the country. For everybody else, stay tuned. A lot of things going on. I don't know if you saw the article today. tough time to be a realtor. There's so few houses for sale in Rhode Island. We have about 1,100,000, more than 1,100,000 people. We have less than 1,000 houses for sale across the entire state. We have 10 realtors for every house that's on the market. It is a very, very tough time. Only the swift and the strong will survive. For everybody else, stay tuned for much, much more. It's only Thursday. We've got a lot more to cover this week. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe and enjoy this great outdoor weather all week.